President Truman issued Executive Order 9835 in 1947, which initiated a program of loyalty reviews for federal employees. It called for dismissal if there were reasonable grounds for belief that the person involved is disloyal to the government of the United States. When President Dwight Eisenhower took office in 1953, he strengthened and extended Truman's loyalty review program, while decreasing the avenues of appeal available to dismissed employees. Hiram Bingham, chairman of the Civil Service Commission Loyalty Review Board, referred to the new rules he was obliged to enforce as just not the American way of doing things. In 1954, my grandfather, who had spent much of his life in public service, was investigated.
United States Civil Service Commission, Washington 25, D.C., September 15, 1954. Mr. Archie Campbell Edwards, Bureau of Inspections and Classification Audits, Room 164, Main Building, U.S. Civil Service Commission. Dear Mr. Edwards, the President of the United States, by Executive Order 10450, dated April 27, 1953, established requirements for government employment to ensure that the employment of each civilian officer or employee within the government service is clearly consistent with the interests of the national security. Attached is a copy of the regulations promulgated by the Commission to govern its operations under the order. A full field investigation conducted in your case developed information which requires evaluation for the purpose of determining whether your employment is clearly consistent with the interests of the national security. In order to assure the Commission that the determination reached is proper and equitable, you are hereby afforded an opportunity to present your explanation with respect to the information by answering the questions in the enclosed interrogatory. They are to be answered fully and in sufficient detail to present fairly your side of the matter, so that the Commission will be apprised of all the facts. In order to facilitate the handling of your case, it is requested that you reply to the interrogatory within 10 days from its receipt, and return it in the enclosed self-addressed envelope. In the event you do not reply within the 10-day period, the Commission will proceed with the adjudication of your case on the basis of the information now at hand and in accordance with the Commission's regulations. This interrogatory is issued pursuant to Section 5 of the attached regulations. Very truly yours, R. E. Greenfield, Security Officer. Archie Campbell Edwards, interrogatory and reply thereto. What is your full name and present address? Archie Campbell Edwards, 3341 Massachusetts Avenue, Southeast, Washington 19, D.C. When and where were you born? March 31, 1901, Port Townsend, Washington. State the name of your employer, the title of your present position, and your salary. U.S. Civil Service Commission, Civil Service, Inspector $9,160. Investigation revealed information that you were instrumental in the appointments of Benjamin Warmiel, Manuel Gerst, and Melton Michael Gordon to positions in the Statistical Division of the United States Civil Service Commission when you were chief of such division, that you were considered to be a friend of these individuals, that during September 1939 you endorsed a chattel mortgage note for Benjamin Warmiel, and that Gordon named you as a reference in an application for federal employment, dated March 24, 1949. If this information is correct, in whole or in part, please state fully. A. The circumstances, nature, extent, and period of your association with the above-named individuals, including a full explanation as to the circumstances of their appointments to positions in the Statistical Division, and your participation in same. B. Your knowledge concerning the organizational affiliations and activities of the above-named, your impression of their political views, and whether you ever had any reason to believe them sympathetic to communism, or to being a member of, affiliated with, or having any connection with the Communist Party, or any organization which is, or has been, a front for or controlled by the Communist Party. C. In what manner, if any, you have taken part in or acquiesced in such affiliations, activities or sympathies. D. Any other information that you believe to be pertinent to this inquiry.
Benjamin Warmiel. A. Subject was promoted to the Statistical Division from the Service Records Division as, I believe, a statistical clerk, from a promotion register. A register of names was submitted to me by Mr. C. C. Hathaway, then Personnel Director. Mr. Hathaway informed me that subject had been on the register for some time, and that, if I could use Warmiel, he, Hathaway, would appreciate it. On examining the forms 57 submitted, I had no doubt that Warmiel was the best qualified. As far as I can remember, I did not even know him at the time of selection. His performance on the job was satisfactory, both as to quality and quantity of output. When he left my supervision to go to the national roster of professional and scientific personnel in late 1941 or early 1942, he had advanced to statistician P2. Sometime after he entered on duty in statistics, he approached me with a request to endorse a note so that he could buy an inexpensive car. I obliged him, as has been my practice with persons whom I judged honest. We could hardly be said to be friends in a social sense. Except for attending the annual picnics of the division and playing a few games of baseball, we did not meet socially to the best of my knowledge. He was married while at the commission, but as far as I can recall, I never met his wife. They may have attended some commission dances in the old Athletic and Recreation Association, which I helped organize in the commission. However, I was always so busy attending to the business end of these affairs that I seldom had time to be very sociable with anyone. For a short time after I came to the Civil Service Commission, I was a member of the old UFWA, a CIO affiliate, and also a member of the NFFE No. 2, since 1929 to date. My father before me was also a member of the NFFE. I believe Wormiel was a member of the UFWA, but since I attended only a half-dozen meetings, I am not positive. If he was, I am quite certain that I did not know whether he was a member at the time I selected him from the promotion panel. If Wormiel was a communist or communist sympathizer, I was unaware of it. He never gave any indication of such beliefs. I have heard that he has been separated from the UN, but I am not informed as to the actual circumstances. I learned indirectly in 1952 that his wife had been a communist at one time. This will be explained under the statement on Gordon, since both individuals are concerned. I have not seen Wormiel since about 1947, when I was in to see Mr. James O'Brien on a manpower matter with a Colonel Fletcher. Jimmy had Wormiel in the conference. Before that, I cannot remember having seen him since March 1942, when I entered military duty, although I may have dropped by their office in 1943, before going overseas. I did not care much for Wormiel as an individual. He was, however, a good worker and competent in his field. I have never employed persons for their friendship, salesmanship, or engaging personality only for merit. Manuel Gerst. At this point, I should like to point out that the official organizations which I headed in the Civil Service Commission in 1941 has a total population of almost 1,000 as follows. Statistical Division, about 115. Interdepartmental Placement Service, about 850. Decentralization Service, about 25. Total, about 990. Counting turnover, presumably 1,200 employees were involved. Since then, in the military service, hundreds more have worked for me indirectly. Although many of the employees knew me, I never got to know most of them even by sight. I had offices in the main building, the Barber and Ross building, the old Hecht warehouse, and at 901 East Street Northwest. As for Gerst, I remember the name, but I cannot recall what he looked like or what job he worked on. If I hired him before 1941, I think I would remember his face if I saw him. In his case, I can supply you with no details. I can say this, however, that I never knowingly associated with, employed, or otherwise dealt with a person who was a communist or communist sympathizer. My long association with the AFL and the NFFE, the former extending back to World War I, had put me on the alert for communists, who were not permitted to be members of either union. Melton Michael Gordon. A. Subject was appointed by interagency transfer, I believe, to the Statistical Division as a junior statistician in late 1939 or early 1940, and left in 1941, having advanced, I believe, to a P2. I do not recall whether I got his name from a certificate or not, but that was my usual practice if I could not promote from within the Civil Service Commission. I did not know him before he was appointed as far as I can remember. Gordon was a capable statistician and a good worker. He sometimes played on the softball team and regularly bowled on the division team for 2 years as I recall. Incidentally, The division won several straight softball championships and a couple of bowling championships, as I remember, asked Ned Bogan. Some time after Gordon went to work for me, our Mr. Joseph Campbell, then an investigator, made a report to me on him. This was the practice between 1938 and 1942, as I recall. I do not remember Mr. Campbell's making any definite recommendation for or against keeping Mr. Gordon, but I do recall that he pointed out a discrepancy in one statement made on the Selective Service form and one on his income tax form as to monies paid his wife, from whom he was separated. As I recall, he stated one at $25 a month and the other at $400 a year. Since there was little difference, and since he had claimed no deferment on the draft, I dismissed the matter as of little importance. Actually, he enlisted in the military service some months later, but I do not know what rank he attained. B. It is my belief that Gordon was or became a member of the UFWA for the short time it operated in the Commission. As I have said before, I only participated in 6 meetings or so. Mr. Gordon never impressed me as being a radical in any way. His activity in sports and dances was such that I cannot see how he would have had the time to be active in any communist organization. During the war, Gordon wrote to me occasionally. This is a common practice of subordinates who want to keep in touch with the old man. He went to Europe, and I went to the Southwest Pacific. Consequently, I did not see him from 1943 until 1947 or 1948. Outside our meetings at baseball and bowling, and his attendance at other Civil Service Commission athletic and recreational activities, I only recall going out in the evening with him once. He took my wife and me to a Chinese restaurant. He was alone. I believe this was in return for having had him at one of the division picnics. He may have been a guest at our house for dinner once, but not with anyone. The reason Gordon gave me for leaving the Civil Service Commission was that Wormiel had married his divorced wife, and working under such circumstances was no longer tenable. After the war, Gordon got a job with War Assets Administration. Here he faced a loyalty board and was cleared. I knew nothing of the circumstances and am not even certain of the date, but would place it in the later 1940s. Later, in 1951, as I recall, I got a call from a Mr. J.A. Wallace in the Air Force relative to Gordon's professional abilities. I told him Gordon was a competent statistician and a good worker. I presume this call was tied in with his naming me as a reference on SF-57 in 1949. A few months later, Mr. Gordon was cited as a possible security risk and asked me through his lawyer to appear. I told the lawyer I could speak favorably of his professional abilities and that I knew no derogatory information about him other than the fact that he had been called before a loyalty board at War Assets. At the hearing, I probably had 8 or 10 minutes and testified along the line indicated above. To my surprise, the prosecutor asked me, "Did you know what his first wife had been a communist in the 30s?" I did not, so stated, and left the stand. This was the first time that I had ever had knowledge of any derogatory information concerning either Gordon or Wormiel. Since then, my only contact with either of them was an accidental meeting on the street with Gordon a few weeks ago. He stated that he was in insurance and that his case with the Air Force had not been concluded. I did not discuss the matter further. C. I have never been a member of the Communist Party or an affiliate so far as I know. I have stated that I was a member of the NFFE No. 2 from 1929 to date, and of UFWA from 1938 to 1941, and was active in the Employee Recreational Association. The last two being the only organizations that I know Wormiel and Gordon were connected with, but in none of them were any communist or communist line opinions expressed. At present, I am president of the Civil Service Commission branch of NFFE No. 2. D. Various occupations attract large numbers of persons of the same racial strain. Chinese go in for laundries and restaurants. Greeks specialize to some degree in restaurants. Italians like barbering, and Jews prefer business, science, and statistics. I do not recall ever looking at a certificate for a statistical position that did not contain the name of at least one Jew. Some were all Jews. The fact that I hired these Jews does not mean that I favored them over Gentiles. I have always tried to follow the merit system in making appointments and to appoint the best qualified person to the job. On the other hand, I would like to point out that I selected for my assistant chief in the statistical division Mr. Malcolm L. Smith, who is of old American stock, and for the two top jobs in IPS, William Lehman and Ross Pollock. None of these were members of any subversive organization so far as I know. Mr. Smith bought property near me and is my closest neighbor. I would also like to call your attention to the fact that I did not receive any adverse information from the investigation division on Benjamin Wormiel and no significant information concerning Gordon. As for Gerst, I have already stated that I do not remember him, but certainly if derogatory information of significance had been submitted concerning him, he would have been fired.
V. Investigation disclosed information that you had been a close associate of one Meyer Linsky, that Linsky resided in your home around the time of his trip to Russia, after which he praised the Russian form of government, that you and your wife, Jenny Anna Edwards, gave the impression of being in agreement with Linsky's views of admiration for Russia under communism, and that you wife had stated the Communist Party was not harmful to the security of the United States.
Answer. The only part of this information that is true is that Meyer Linsky stayed 5 or 6 days at our home and that he made a trip to Europe. His stay at our house was some time before his trip, and I have no recollection of his discussing any plans at that time. He was employed in New York at the time and asked to stay here to be near his Washington house, which he was having repaired. He provided his own food, which he kept in his room. Because of his untidiness, I asked him to leave, which he did. Though we have known Meyer Linsky since 1930, we have never been a close associate of his, as will appear below. We have never heard Linsky express admiration of Russia under communism, and certainly would not agree with him if we had. He may have commented favorably or unfavorably about what he saw, but certainly expressed no admiration for the Russian system as such. We have been interested in what was going on in Russia, but no more than in what is going on elsewhere in the world that may affect the United States. My wife is certain that she has never stated that the Communist Party was not harmful to the security of the United States. Use of the term security in this connotation is fairly recent. If the question was one of outlawing the Communist Party, she may have said some time ago, as many people did, including, I believe, Mr. Hoover of the FBI, that this action would only drive this small faction underground where it would be harder for the FBI to keep it under surveillance. In the last few weeks, however, Congress has decided to outlaw the Communist Party, and we do not question this action. We have never believed, however, that the United States is likely to be taken over by the Communists, for we both have full confidence in the survival of democracy.
If this information is correct, in whole or in part, please comment fully on A. the above allegations, and fully discuss your and your wife's views with regard to communism, the Communist Party, and Russia, and its form of government from the middle 1930s to the present time.
Answer. In the mid-1930s, it became the consensus of this country that it was better to recognize Russia and try to bring her into communication with the Western world through trade than to continue non-recognition. We agreed with this consensus, but we never belonged to any organization that sought to bring recognition about or to improve Soviet-American relations. To say that we were not interested in what was going on in Russia would not be true. It was an interesting experiment, like a play which you may not agree with, but which holds your interest. At no time did we ever think that the Russian type of government would be preferable to democracy. It was a totalitarian regime like Nazism and fascism. Our interest in what Russia would do grew as Hitler headed for war. A coalition of Russia and Germany would provide a combination of brains and manpower which threatened free governments. Russia stood as a buffer to Hitler's legions and had been our ally in World War I. Our regard for Russia rose as a power on the right side of world affairs, only to drop to zero when she signed a treaty with Hitler, dividing Poland. The Russian seizure of the Baltic states was abhorrent to us. When Germany decided to invade Russia, it was a relief to us. No army has ever successfully invaded Russia in recent years. Furthermore, Hitler's armies would be so occupied with Russia long enough for the United States to rearm. Even so, we realized that our alliance with Russia was an uneasy and expedient one, and though we approved of the aid that this country sent to Russia, we never considered communism a good form of government. As a military man, I would say that no one could disregard the benefit we secured from the 75 or 80 divisions of troops which Russia put in the line against Hitler. I volunteered and was commissioned in March 1942 and was sent to the South Pacific in the fall of 1943. I was overseas when the war ended. I remember discussing the situation with other officers and agreeing that the best thing we could do before starting to disarm the Allied forces was to prevent the spread of communistic influence over Europe. We had the men and supplies available to force Russia to our terms. Many of us felt that no lasting peace could be expected unless Russia was forced back within her own borders. By the time I was discharged late in 1947, I knew there would be conflict of some sort. Nevertheless, I continued in the reserves. My wife, who was with OPA in 1941 to 43, and, after the birth of our fourth child, was with the Tariff Commission, had but one contact with the Russians. In November 1942, my cousin's widow, Mrs. Henry G. Knight, asked my wife to attend the Russian embassy reception with her. As chief of the Bureau of Chemistry and Soils, my cousin had regularly received an invitation as other important personages did. At this time, Russia was popular in the United States. My wife never saw any Russian again. After the war, I remained in the Air Force Reserves and served again during the Korean affair, volunteering to go anywhere for duty. I was assigned to the Air Research and Development Command as Director of Statistical Services. I might add that I remained in the reserves with no idea of gain, but as an example to my 3 boys, all of whom are now in some phase of military activity. A law passed this last session will give me retirement rights if I remain on duty until I am 62 years old. Both my wife and I deeply regretted the loss of Czechoslovakia to the Communists, and were relieved when United States policy was directed to preventing any further loss of territory to Russian influence. Modern children should find the escapes from behind the Iron Curtain among the most thrilling adventures of bravery and human ingenuity of all ages. At the same time, we believe the very existence of the Iron Curtain is an admission of weakness on the part of communist leaders. It is proof that they could not retain control of their people, of the people knew what was going on. We realize the conflict of communist and democratic ideologies will be bitter and costly, but we have no doubt as to the final defeat of communism. People were born to be free and cannot be made into permanent slaves, any more than they can be trained to drop on all fours and become animals.
B. The extent to which you and your wife have ever espoused, supported, or believed in communist doctrines and policies.
My wife and I have never espoused, supported, or believed in communist doctrines and policies that we are aware of.
C. The circumstances, nature, extent, and period of your association with Mr. Linsky, and whether you ever had any reason to believe him sympathetic to communism and Russia, or to his being a member of, affiliated with, or having any connection with the Communist Party, or any organization which is, or has been, a front for or controlled by the Communist Party. Also, your knowledge as to the circumstances and motivation for Linsky's trip to Russia, and whether his access to such country was premised on his political reliability to Russia.
Answer. During part of the time that I was with the Foreign Agricultural Service, Meyer Linsky was also employed there, from 1930 to 1934, or 1935. Thereafter he worked with the Agricultural Adjustment Administration and was considered a capable sugar specialist. About 1935 he bought some lots in my neighborhood and built a house. This structure is a sort of neighborhood legend and has to be seen to be appreciated. Not long after that, about 1937, as I recall, he was employed by the U.S. Cane Sugar Refiners Association in New York at apparently a quite substantial salary. It was during his New York employment that he made, not what can in fairness be called a trip to Russia, but a trip to Europe, visiting England, Sweden, Estonia, Russia, and Italy. Originally, he had planned a more extensive trip, I believe, but the war broke out in 1939 while he was abroad. He sailed from Italy late in 1939. I recall that he had a hard time getting home. My wife and I cannot recall that Linsky praised the Russian government. In fact, all that I can remember was that he said he went in at the north and traveled south by rail to Italy, where he managed to get a boat for home. After his trip, he returned to his New York employment, was later entered the army, serving as we recall in North Africa. During this time, another neighbor saw to his house and collected his rent for him. The next time my wife saw him was when he secured a position at the United States Tariff Commission after leaving the army. My wife was working there as the editor, but had nothing to do with his appointment. Tariff Commissioner Lynn Edminster had been his immediate supervisor in the Foreign Agricultural Service. About this time, a farm in Maryland became his main interest, and he has resided in that area since. I have stopped briefly at this farm twice, but my wife has never been there. On an appeal made by subject, my wife was asked by a civil service investigator how she, herself, was supervised, apparently to develop the manner of Linsky's supervision. At any rate, he apparently was retained and later resigned from the Tariff Commission of his own accord. Since then, he has become more and more devoted to his Maryland land. He is a large property owner, and when he is ready to sell, he will be a wealthy man. One of his farms has over half a mile of waterfront. Of all the persons named in this interrogatory, Linsky is the only one with whom I have had extensive acquaintance. Yet almost our only contact is when he drops in to telephone in connection with securing a new tenant or to make repairs, the other neighbor of whom he used to ask favors having moved away. We have never extended an invitation to him to come to our house for any special occasion or to come alone. Instead of being close associates, I would say we try to be neighborly and courteous as we are to all people. It was part of my early Christian training to remember that Christ was born a Jew, and not to condemn a person for individual peculiarities. On the other hand, I can well understand how his property in this neighborhood may have been a sore trial to his nearest neighbor, who takes great pride in his lovely home and grounds. Linsky has also managed to quarrel with the former owner of his city lots. This is an old man almost 90, who is respected in the neighborhood where he and his family have been large landowners. This old gentleman possibly might call someone, particularly a Jew who did not agree with him, a communist. As part of the same neighborliness that we show Linsky, we have stored some of the old gentleman's things. In contrast with Linsky, however, this old gentleman has been a frequently invited guest alone and for parties at our home. The same is true for my nearest neighboring Mr. Malcolm Smith and his family. I have no reason for believing Linsky to be sympathetic to communism in Russia, or that he has ever been a member of, affiliated with, or having any connection with the Communist Party or any organization which is, or has been a front or controlled by the Communist Party. The only organization that I know he ever joined was the NFFE No. 2, Agriculture Branch. I also have no reason to believe his European trip, which included Russia, was motivated by other than pleasure and the desire to see these countries. He had saved a substantial sum of money and was willing to spend some of it. Nor have I any reason to think his access to Russia was premised on his political reliability to Russia. I would classify Linsky as a rugged individualist of the most rugged pioneer type.
Investigation revealed information of your wife reportedly stating that you and she knew a captain in the United States Army whom both of you thought to be a communist. If the above information is correct, in whole or in part, please furnish full particulars as to a. the name of such captain, b. the circumstances, nature, extent, and period of association with such captain, and the reasons for your and your wife's belief that he was a communist, c. what association you and or your wife have ever had with individuals known to you to be Communist Party members or communist sympathizers.
Answer. My wife has never stated that she knew a captain in the United States Army, whom both of us know to be a communist. If we had known of such, we would have reported it. Meyer Linsky was a captain and then a major, but as I have said, no communist. The only other captain that we can recall that we both know is a woman, now in the WAC Reserves, but serving at a civilian job in the Air Force. We believe her political beliefs to be beyond reproach. The only person I have ever worked with or known personally who later turned out to have had dealings with communists is Julian Wadley. I never knew Wadley before he came to the Foreign Agricultural Service when I was there. We were only the most casual of office acquaintances, as he worked in another office under Dr. Lynn Edminster, now at the Tariff Commission. At the time Wadley worked in the Department of Agriculture, he was an exponent of conservative Marshallian economics. He was at two affairs that we gave for a large number of FAS employees and their families, a supper and a picnic. He never returned the hospitality. He went to the State Department in the early 30s. I was never in his home. I know of no one in FAS who suspected that he had beliefs which it turned out in the Hiss investigations that he did entertain.
Have you or your wife ever been a member of, affiliated with, or in sympathetic association with the Communist Party, or any organization which is, or has been, a front for, or controlled by the Communist Party? If so, explain fully.
Answer: neither my wife nor I have ever been a member of, affiliated with, or in sympathetic association with the Communist Party, or any organization which is, or has been, a front for or controlled by the Communist Party.
If you feel there is any other information that might contribute to an understanding of all pertinent facts, or might be of value in considering the question of your employment being clearly consistent with the interests of the national security, you may include such information in your reply.
Answer: I did not seek the position in the Civil Service Commission that I took in 1938. I was very happy, successful, and satisfied at the Department of Agriculture. I was recommended for the position of Chief of the Statistical Division by Dr. Copeland and Mr. Donald Riley of the Bureau of the Budget. Mr. Roy F. Hendrickson, Director of Personnel of the Department of Agriculture, tried to get me to stay and offered me the employee activities job in his office at the same pay offered me by the Civil Service Commission. Also, I am quite certain that, if my chief, Mr. Leslie O. Wheeler, had not been in Europe, he also would have made a counteroffer. Since the Civil Service Commission had already completed their investigation, the investigators were Mr. Meyer and Mr. Bailey, and had accepted me, I did not see how I could accept an equal offer and be fair. Therefore, I transferred to the Civil Service Commission. One of my first instructions was to take an active part in introducing new ideas and methods. I believe the record bears this out. I built a staff of about 75 up to nearly 1,000. I introduced new ideas and methods. Many of the younger administrators were sold on these methods and still are, although the IPS and Decentralization Service, Transfer Service, are but a shadow of their former size. Both my wife and I have devoted countless hours to volunteer organizations for the public good and service. I organized the Agricultural Employees Recreational Association, which is still in existence. For my services, I am highly regarded by W. W. Stockberger and prepared a section on employee activities for his annual report for several years. When I left agriculture in 1938, the Athletic and Recreational Association gave me a desk pen set, which Mr. Roy F. Hendrickson, Director of Personnel, presented. As chairman of the Arrangements Committee, I also assisted in introducing many courses in personnel management in the USDA Graduate School, receiving no compensation for my services. My wife has also taught there and is now teaching in the editing course. For these services she was commended by the late Dr. M. C. Merrill, Chief of Publications at Agriculture. The pay at the graduate school is considered nominal for the time put into teaching. I organized the Women's Battalion, a group of young government women who served as hostesses at service dances. This was one of the earliest and most prominent efforts to maintain morale among the armed forces in Washington. Vouchers were required for these women before they were accepted. The director of printing and engraving allowed me to use his auditorium once a week for dances, and I also had the cafeteria under the departmental auditorium. In addition, arrangements were made to visit nearby camps under careful chaperonage. When I was commissioned in the Air Force, I arranged for the D.C. Recreational Department to take over this activity, which is still functioning. My wife continued to serve also at these functions until her pregnancy interfered. Once she begged sugar from friends and sacrificed family rations for weeks to bake fruitcake and cookies enough to serve 500 servicemen and girls at Christmas. After the birth of our fourth child, my wife served as Red Cross hospital aide and later became a first aid instructor. She has put in a decade of service with Boy, Cub Scouts and Girl Scouts, movements which we both consider are among the most effective means of protection the country has against communist infiltration of youth. These are but a few of our civic activities. In all these activities we have made hundreds of friends. Because we have always insisted on fair treatment of minority groups, we apparently have also made some enemies. It would be the greatest mockery of a decent federal service if the word of malice or ignorant distortion of these few were to damage the careers of two people who have served their government and their community as we have, and to blight the lives of 4 children and a grandmother dependent on us. Both of us entered the government service via stiff written competitive examination during the Hoover administration. Because we have lived in the District of Columbia and have been government employees for a quarter of a century, we have not been able to cast our ballots, but the last time we both voted for Hoover. Few people have as much to fear from communism as I have. I was a volunteer in World War II at the age of 41, and the father of 3 children. As a division chief in the Civil Service Commission and with family dependents, I probably would never have been called to active duty. Certainly many persons younger than I and with less important positions and fewer family obligations were not called to duty. Moreover, I suffered a sharp loss in income by enlisting and accepting the commission of captain, from which I rose to colonel. At the conclusion of my service, I remained in the reserves and was active with no thought of compensation and with no thought of retirement benefits. I was involuntarily recalled to active duty in 1951 in the Korean affair, and although I did not go overseas, I offered to go anywhere. As such, I have fought against the People's Army of Northern Korea. My 3 boys, ages 15 to 18, are in some form of military service. Needless to say, my goose is cooked if Russia should ever take over. I am still in the active Air Force Reserve and attend required formations regularly. Integrity in public service has been a tradition in my family. My father served 30 years in the Customs Service. My cousin, Dr. Henry G. Knight, was appointed Chief of the Bureau of Chemistry and Soils in the U.S. Department of Agriculture under the Republican administration and was continued in his post by the Democratic administration. Before his death in 1943, he had the satisfaction of having directed through to success many projects which helped in the final victory, projects such as synthetic rubber, DDT, and desiccated food. Another cousin, Guy Edwards, now superintendent of the Shenandoah National Park, has been in the National Park Service for about 30 years. He not only served in World War I, but volunteered and was commissioned in World War II. Although I realize that the security of the United States is of paramount importance, as only a person who has worn his country's uniform under fire can possibly realize it, and believe that all doubts must be resolved, I cannot close this interrogatory without adding that I am deeply humiliated and hurt that I am even remotely considered a security risk. I can conceive of no sound program which does not place proof of willingness to fight for one's country as the first requisite and which does not take a positive approach, i.e., that not only requires that an individual must do nothing against the security of his country, but also that he must do something for that security. I am sure this is the intention of the President and people of this country. On that basis, I doubt whether any individual in the Civil Service Commission can present a better record than mine, although I take my hat off before the records of many other persons in the armed services and elsewhere. I certify that the above statements are true, complete, and correct to the best of my knowledge and belief, and are made in good faith. September 27, 1954. Archie Campbell Edwards.
United States Civil Service Commission, Washington 25, D.C. January 12, 1955. Mr. Archie C. Edwards. 3341 Massachusetts Avenue, Southeast Washington 19, D.C. Dear Mr. Edwards, this is to advise you that a finding has been made under the provisions of Executive Order 10,450, Security Requirements for Government Employment, that your retention in employment is clearly consistent with the interests of the national security. This finding will be made a part of your official personnel folder. Sincerely yours. R. E. Greenfield. Security Officer.
Following the censure of Senator Joseph McCarthy in December 1954, much of the Red Scare fervor died down. Investigations into alleged communists continued, although their intensity and public visibility declined over time. Benjamin Wormiel was subpoenaed before the U.S. Senate subcommittee to investigate the administration of the Internal Security Act. This was a lesser-known Senate equivalent of the House Un-American Activities Committee. He invoked the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination when questioned under oath about communist affiliation. He was fired from the United Nations and became blacklisted from government jobs. He became a self-employed insurance broker until he retired in 1980. He was on the board of directors of the Coconut Creek Democratic Club. He passed away in 1999. Meyer Linsky only lived one more year after these events. He was killed with a water pipe in a struggle over a $20 dispute. At the time of the death, Linsky lived alone in a trailer with a dog as his only companion. Melton Michael Gordon continued to live in Arlington, Virginia until he passed away in 1985. Manuel Manny Gerst lived in Greenbelt, Maryland in the early 1940s. He then moved to California. He died in 1998. Raymond Edward Greenfield left the Civil Service Commission and became Chief of Security for the Federal Aviation Administration. He retired in 1967 and died in 1982 in Sarasota, Florida.